going to do a deep dive on the Talking Stick Resort in Talking Stick, Arizona, which won a 2024 Out of This World Experience Award from Launch Code. So we are going to drop a link so you guys can read a little bit about that if you're interested. And also, thank you to OpenEye Global for sponsoring today's event. We're very excited. So we're going to specifically focus on Talking Stick's lobby installation, which you can see some beautiful photos of on this page. I can see that you guys have been watching and taking a look at a few of those things as well, which is very cool. So this installation was done by CCS Presentation Systems in collaboration with OpenEye Global. So the project has a huge dvLED wall mounted on the ceiling in the main entryway of the hotel, a circular rotunda measuring 40 by 40 feet. The entryway went from a static space to a dynamic experience that highlights the uniqueness of the cultures native to Arizona and the beauty of the desert. So we're going to be talking all about this today. I am so excited to get to do this. So I'm going to be bringing on Brian Mazzaros of OpenEye Global, Douglas Hampton Dowson of OpenEye Global, and then I think Zach Sabo of CCS Presentation Systems is going to try to join us in a second too. So hi guys, welcome.
Hey Steph, thanks for having us.
Of course. So let's just jump right in. I'm so excited to talk about this. This is such a cool installation. We've covered it both on Rave and on Launch Code. We obviously really like it. So I would love to learn a little bit about how the project came together and what the overall goal was. And this is just, we're just having a conversation here. So just whoever wants to take it can answer.
Yeah. This was definitely a fun one to work on, for us, and even cooler the fact we got a chance to team up with CCS on it. But you have, Talking Stick, which is a very well-known casino in the Arizona, Phoenix metropolitan area, and they've been going through a transformation of their space over the past few years and looking at different ways to bring more technology into it. Part of it from a guest experience and part of it more from environmental, just to add a little bit more ambiance and entertainment. And so they had this area that was this rotunda, as you see from the photos, but this was this curved dome, and it didn't really do anything. It didn't really, have this spectacular awe as people walked in. It was just a painted blue ceiling. I think it was even like clouds, if I remember correctly, when I first saw it. And so really the thought was, how do you take this space that people are coming through and how do you create this kind of awe-inspiring wow moment for it? And, there was a lot of discussion of do you create an LED that is curved to the dome? Do you try to find something that's a little bit more, suspended from the ceiling? And through just a variety of different, approaches and ideas, the thought was really to not go so much with the dome, but just to flatten the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't do too much in terms of the height in that area, since it was pretty high ceiling as it is. But it just kind of created this opportunity to sort of add a different sort of, element into the space, and then couple that with the resort really wanted to create sort of this wow moment, so that it became sort of this Instagrammable moment that allowed, as soon as, guests came in, they were sort of taken back by this. They had an opportunity to, capture a moment that was unique and different. And then I think they also were looking at it from, point of, we just don't want this to be something to where it's just promotions. And so you come in and you're just totally greeted by all of these casinos, all these game machines that are there. So, the idea was make it more environmental, maybe do some promotional work to it, but get it to the point to where there could be something interesting and inviting. So then that's, kind of where we came in and sort of counterbalance what CCS was doing creatively from, LED integration. So yeah, really a fun one and a great space.
Very cool. So you kind of mentioned how Talking Stick, they wanted to really balance out what this was going to be. What do you think they were ultimately trying to achieve? Do you think that they were trying to achieve balance between like beauty with like something Instagrammable for a younger crowd with promotion?
Doug, you probably got a better perspective on this.
Yeah, it had a very bold mandate actually at the start, which was to have no words, right? The marketing team specifically did not want it to be a bunch of ads. which usually happens with digital signage. Over time, it just descends into how can we sell stuff. And so it was really cool to create something that had a pure vision. It was purely about how people felt when they came in and how it represented the casino. And to your point, they were definitely looking to broaden the audience they appeal to. I think casinos are struggling a little bit with older demographic being the primary audience. How can we use design? How can we use technology? How can we create cool experiences to actually make it be a place people wanted to check out? So yeah, it was big on thematic things, seasonal things, holiday things, environmental things, and that all came together to create this cool vision.
Yeah, no, I'm watching the content pieces that are playing now. Like, it's so awesome. But how do you kind of decide like where the balance is between like just wanting to create beauty with like, okay, you have to promote at least a little bit in order for something to live in the lobby? Like, where do you think that balance is? Sorry, that's like such a huge question.
Yeah, well, I think the mandate we were given actually did achieve that balance. So if you think about the playlist itself, you know, a minute and a half of the playlist was very much environmental, scenery, night sky, things like that. And the second part of the playlist was, you know, they have an association with the baseball team in the area. Sorry, Brian, what were they called again?
Diamondbacks.
I'm not American, so I don't remember all the baseball teams. Yeah, okay. So yeah, they have a partnership with the Diamondbacks. So we did create like a piece of content that featured a Diamondbacks logoed ball, but it didn't say written on it like, hey, Diamondbacks, you know, text this number, blah, blah, blah. Or, you know, there was promotion with the local golf course as well. Sorry guys, I'm forgetting the name of it.
It was the Waste Management.
Waste Management Open. So again, we're not using words to promote the fact that it's Waste Management Open, but ambiently, by kind of featuring the golf ball and by featuring a particular hole they were kind of sponsoring, we could get that message across.
Cool.
We did work closely with Doug and give him some baseball knowledge through the course of this. But he did excel when he came to golf, though.
That's the one with the touchdowns, right?
That's okay. I'm American and I know next to nothing about sports, so it's really fine. Like any sports. So, in terms of experience for a lobby that is also a casino, I feel like there are so many unique challenges because the audience is so far and few between. Like you talked about, the audience for a casino is probably going to be a little older, but in terms of like what is also a hotel lobby, like that age range can be crazy. So what considerations were made in terms of like user and like, you know, audience experience?
Yeah, I can talk to that one a little bit. There was a whole bunch of different types of considerations we had to make. I think the first one to highlight was on the casino side. So this casino is associated with two different tribes. One is called the Pima, and the other one is the Maricopa. And so it was actually the content itself, we had to include considerations from that community. So for example, pieces that included, you know, the landscape, or they had to feature certain significant animals, or the way we represented the rock. And the Pima tribe are actually known as the river people. So the way we represented the river and the water and the churning of water, all of that was dead important. So that was kind of like one important consideration was like, are we representing this community accurately? But the second sort of consideration I would say is a little bit physically speaking, because this is such a physically strong piece, you know, it dominates the space. And actually, because it's such a giant piece, the content is the light source for the area. So meaning like we have night skies that we couldn't get too dark. We have like daytime scenes that couldn't get too bright. You know, we really had to think about not stressing people out with like this giant sky of like color and movement and motion. So that kind of like being physically aware of the space as well. And then I guess like the third sort of consideration we think about the user experience is this installation does feature some forced perspective. And forced perspective is all about morphing content so that it looks great from particular viewpoints. But, you know, when you have a public space and people are walking from different directions and things like that, kind of like figuring out, well, what's the right viewpoint we want to have and how much of that effect we want to feature to create like a really good experience.
Good points, all of them. So speaking of the content, the forced perspective, so like the initial creative featured 3D, like anamorphic forced perspective content. Did that create any challenges for you? And if so, how did you overcome them?
I mean, with any type of forced perspective or anamorphic content, the first challenge for anybody who's doing it is just a technical process of it.
Right.
Because you to create content that makes sense on your screen as it's being produced, but then you have to sort of morph it and distort it so it makes sense in situ. But of course, how do you show what it's going to look like when you're presenting and sharing it for approvals or for inspiration? So you kind of have to like create your workflow first, and then think of like, in our case, we create a 3D model of the environment so that we could preview content kind of from how it would look like in real life. And I think like the other sort of challenge we had in this particular case with anamorphic content is the distance from someone's eyes to the screen.
Yeah.
So if you think about great examples of that, like Times Square or like billboards, it's kind of far away and people are all looking at it from a reasonably singular direction. So that's, it works really well. You have some distance between it. Here, when the ceiling is a little bit closer and people are coming from various directions, that was a challenge. That was a challenge to determine what's just the right angle, but also to rotate the content kind of throughout the day so it worked from people who are in the casino, like actually using machines and things like that, versus people who are kind of walking in.
Very cool. And I think we have Zach here now, so we can bring him in as well. So let's do that. Zach, forgive me if I pronounce your last name wrong, Sabo of CCS Presentation Systems. So I think,
yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, welcome. If you want to introduce yourself really quick, a little bit more, talk about you and the type of work you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and apologies for being late. It's a busy time around here. So I'm Zach Sabo, design engineer with CCS Presentation Systems in Arizona. I actually helped coordinate this project with Nanolumens and OpenEye Global to make this amazing project happen. One of these projects, these kind of projects just make me super excited about the industry. This really like makes me so happy and thankful to be a part of the industry and be a part of cool experiences like this. And just to even be a small part of it is so cool, but just to involve all of these talented parties is just an amazing thing. So I on my side, I helped coordinate with these guys. They are the experts with content. I'm sure you guys are already discussing some of their work, but OpenEye has been really great to work with. Nanolumens is a great partner as well with this display, and just had a really great time working on this. So.
Very cool. So yeah, kind of taking a sidestep away from content for a second. Another challenge that I'm sure came up was like the size of the LED. Like that can't have been easy to design and integrate. So do you want to talk a little bit about the approach to make this a flawless install?
Yeah, absolutely. On the engineering side, it's very involved, right? So on our side, as an integrator, our goal is to make this as seamless as possible, making everything go according to plan, according to our client's plan, making their vision come to life, right? And so our goal is to make this project as close to that vision as possible while getting it done on time, right? So our goal was to involve all the trades as soon as possible. That was super critical, whether that's electricians, general contractors if needed, the content creator, the media server provider. All of these things have to come together for a seamless install. And once we do involve those trades and parties, giving them as much information as possible, right? The more upfront information we can give them, the better, and the faster things are going to move along in a timely manner. And so just making sure all of those are intact, and also the project schedule. So in that same note, our project managers are awesome in creating that schedule, just so we can get everything lined up. Some trades can't do their work without the previous one finishing. So it's very critical that this timeline be completed. Now we'll probably discuss some challenges later, but one of them was getting some of the parts in time and, you know, having some missing information that we weren't able to get, and that came later. But that still ended up working out in the end, and you can see what the result was. It's pretty awesome.
Awesome. What type of technology was required to drive the content on this type of display?
Yeah, so this is where my expertise came into play, because I was actually the one commissioning this side of the project, was the content side. I worked very closely with Brian and Doug's and his team, and just working out the content. But before that, we had to provide a piece of hardware that would be able to support such large video files, because we're talking about a display that's just over 6K in resolution, you know, somewhere between 6 and 8K. So it's a very, very large resolution display. And so what ended up happening was our LED provider, Nanolumens, actually provides you all of the processors needed. And in this case, it was such a large custom display, it needed about 6 processors in the rack. And so at 6 4K images, that's the way to think about it, right? Split into this wall, and then that drives all of the content onto the cabinets. So, but before it even hits that part of it, we have media servers. And I say servers plural because you don't just need one in this kind of a project. This size of a display requires multiple servers. So we actually had 2 in conjunction, synchronized with the same content and frame rate and everything. So the hardware goes media server, hit a Nova Star processor, whatever have you, right, to drive content to the display. Now, to make sure that all of this seamlessly works together and there's no lag on one part of the display compared to the other, you also need a generator that can synchronize all of these components together. And so that's what we ended up doing, was providing that generator and the synchronized with the media servers. And then on top of that, you know, having a small isolated network to make sure that the content can sync between the 2 servers as well.
Very cool. So kind of like now kind of going back into like the content and the creative portion of this, Brian and Doug, they kind of started to talk about this some, but what was the creative process essentially like? And this is for whoever wants to take it. Y'all can all, we're just chatting.
Yeah, Brian and Doug are awesome with the creative stuff. I think they can talk a little bit about, you know, what their vision was, but we presented different ideas to Talking Stick, and they were really open to different ideas as far as what kind of content they wanted to show. A lot of it was based around holidays and promotional content with some of the local sports teams, things like that. And so Doug and Brian's team really came up with some creative content, and part of that, as you may have already talked about, was forced perspective content. Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, it's always a challenge when you go into like a project like this, because you know there's client vision, and you know the client is kind of, I want this, I want that, and you know, look at this and look at that, and so the, you know, the challenge is taking them a few steps back, you know, and that's where, you know, kind of taking them through a real true visioning process to really help them understand, you know, what makes sense to sort of best represent the brand and the culture, and then also, you know, the idea of this sort of wow moment. And so then it's like you take them through the process and say, well, this makes sense, and these are achievable concepts and ideas, and then that's where, you know, Doug and team are really kind of following this to say, you know, again, what is there from a brand, what is there from assets, what is there that aligns with all these different, you know, this narrative that they want to compose, and this idea of, you know, how do we tell a story within a matter of minutes and still be able to achieve all these different aspects of what they're looking to pull into it. So I don't know if Doug, you want to talk a little bit more on the visioning bit of it?
Yeah, I think it's really important to not jump to the solution, of course, to not just jump to the endpoint and start animating or start storyboarding. So first off, our process is make sure we really align on the needs and the goals. So that's the needs from the brand perspective, and the needs from what we think from the consumer's perspective is as well. And the guys were saying in this case, it's sort of a creation of this library of content pieces, some environmental, some are sort of holiday or seasonal. And we always start with mood boarding, so meaning we might take examples from theater or from movies or from other installations. So together we start to form up like a vision of what it would be, right? And that becomes very efficient because it means we're not going down a path and then the customer's like, hey, actually that doesn't quite work. And we learned a lot in that process about what we could and couldn't do, also from like a tribal perspective, like what could be potentially offensive, the use of light or the use of characters and things like that. So that was really fascinating. And then from there, we do go into like hand-drawn storyboards. And now they get a sense of what the animation would be. And then we start doing some production stills. So we get a real sense of like, okay, this is the direction we're going in. And then draft animations that are produced in a 3D model so they can kind of see it. And then from there, it's kind of, we were making a guess. So the animations have to go on the live screen. And then we would get like people like Zach who send us photographs or videos so we could actually tell, do we need to tweak this? Is it working? Yes or no? I just wanted to say, any creative process we're running, we don't bring creative ego to the table. It's super collaborative. At the end of the day, it has to be what works for the brand and it has to be what works for the customer.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we had a pretty good question come in from the audience. So someone asked, how often is the content changed out? Was it all pre-made for the year, or do you have a plan or writer to add more? Do you remote in for changes, or must they be made on site?
Wow, that's a lot of really good questions. And the last one I can answer. The main thing with this project as far as content upload and changing the content out was it had to be on an isolated network. Again, we didn't want it to touch the client's network. And so the idea is that you're able to be present in the space while you upload the content and make changes so you can see those changes in real time. That was very important. But because of that, it's also localized. So, you're not introducing any security risks by doing that. It's definitely not a remote process. It's very on-site and hands-on. And we like it that way. That way you can see exactly what you're changing and if it's, sized proportionally correctly and things like that.
So as far as the other questions, so there's a couple different sort of categories of pieces that we created, some of them being more evergreen that could be used throughout the course of the year. They skewed a little bit more towards environmental, so a starry night, clouds moving, non-force perspective. And then you had various force perspective pieces that some of them were towards holidays, so Lunar New Year, just your typical holidays that they wanted to focus on. And then some of them towards sort of relationships they had with, Doug had mentioned Arizona Diamondbacks. Obviously, they had head into spring training and out through the course of the season. Waste Management Open as well, which they also do sponsor. And so those pieces obviously are more seasonal. And then there was a couple of other sort of category-specific pieces that we created. And it kind of set them up too, because after we went through that kind of initial development of content, then there was those opportunities for their team themselves to come in to start to creating a few pieces, kind of following along the sort of the cues and the narrative that we created. And again, some of those pieces are not really skewed towards overly promotional, which we kind of helped to set them up so that the pieces come in, sort of play off of one of those types of themes, more or less on the anamorphic, which is more, our special what we're taking on. But, the pieces they recreate sort of align in those categories, whether it's more environmental, promotional, but without it being, in your face specials. It takes on more of perspective of culture, as Doug was talking about before. So yeah, and I mean they're constantly swapping that out. More of the promotional pieces, obviously they're creating almost every month as far as new pieces that are going up to it. And then a lot of what we've created then kind of comes in at times is not to say it's filler, but just a way to kind of add a little bit more of a depth to the ultimate, the overall playlist of it.
Cool. Well, I wanted to talk about proof of concept for a minute. So how do you provide a proof of concept for the client? And then how did you approach testing the content on the display?
So proof of concept really started at the beginning, the genesis of the project, when we involved all of the parties. And again, we chose these parties because of their reputation and their track record of already having done this before. So, you know, what's great about Nanolumens as a display partner was one of the inspirations that led to Talking Stick choosing this display in particular was a previous project that Nanolumens had done in Atlanta at the Ron Clark Academy. And it's a very interesting ceiling display, and you got like a flying dragon for the content. And they really liked that idea of feeling immersed in a space. And so we brought all of these parties together, and then we presented it to them and said, along with the budget, of course, the initial budget, and said, this is what we can do. This is what is possible. And this is what you can imagine as the end result. Here's an example. It's always good to draw from other successful installations, and it's called benchmarking, right? So that was the proof of concept side of things, and with the testing of the content, I was very hands-on with that process. And you know what was really great about that was I got to make those changes in real time, just like the casino staff is doing to this day, being up there and changing that content and making sure it's all scaled correctly. The colors are accurately represented, and the image is coming across as the immersive image that they were looking for, the casino. And what's really cool too is that we were able to rotate that image if needed. The discussion came up, would it be better to have this immersive experience be experienced from the front entrance or from the casino slot floor side looking back? And so we played around with both of those as we were testing it, and it was a very fun, interesting process.
Nice. Well, we got a couple more audience questions in, so I figured I would toss those in here too. So Alex asks, was the entire wall a custom-built piece by Nanolumens, or were they able to utilize standard cabinets and panels alongside with custom cabinets for the round edges?
So it's standard panels with a custom configuration. So they actually did use standard components, is just in a custom fashion, right? What's interesting about this display is it's supposed to be a circle, right? But because of the way the cabinets are built, you have to stagger them in sort of rectangular fashion and try and make it as close to a circle as you can. LED cabinets are square or rectangular in nature, so you can't just slice off part of that. It's still, you know, using those standard components and receiving cards and things like that. They're just oriented in a different way. And again, you use several different processors to matrix that content out and make sure it's one seamless image. And that's the cool part. So again, all standard, but it's just you have to create it in a custom fashion.
And then last question that I have for now from the audience is, what media server do they use? The anamorphic content is really neat. Great work to all.
Yeah, the cool thing is the anamorphic content is not built. The encoded file is not an anamorphic piece. It's just a standard video file, but the way that OpenEye and their team was able to do, they so cleverly made this two-dimensional video file look three-dimensional from a certain perspective. So it's something that you can do. It's not like you need, you know, a media server that takes a 3D file or something like you see in the movies when you go watch a 3D movie. It's actually a 2D video file, and it's a server that we used from TV One. If you're familiar with the Green Hippo lineup, that is exactly what they're using right now. It's a highly capable media server. It takes, you know, again, up to probably even larger than 8K and scales it down according to what your outputs require. And so we were able to take that one piece of content, synchronize it between the two Green Hippo servers, and then you can project it just like you would with other signage solutions. So
very cool. So now a question that I have for each of you is, I would like you to go around and each tell me, like, what was the biggest overall challenge that you each found in this project and how you overcame them. Brian, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's the anamorphic piece. You know, I think getting it, you know, just right, and I think the other one too, which I kind of thought was really cool is, I mean, with the anamorphic, you're trying to create that hard line that matches up with the architecture. And, I remember, seeing photos and, even having a conversation with Doug of going through that process of actually trying to figure out the correct shade of like beige that wall was painted. And then it was even like with, Zach and nanolumens in the mix too, because then it, as they're going through color balancing and adjustments on the screen like that, even the slight adjustment then throws off that beige. So there's a picture I remember of all these different shades of different colors of beige, just trying to line it up just properly. And without that getting correctly, then that sort of blows the illusion, because you want to show this sort of this seamless connection between where the digital ends and where the actual ceiling picks up. So I think the challenge is just that hard line. I know it sounds something simple, but it was like still part of the illusion that, so that was a real big challenge, for us.
Nice. Doug, what do you think?
Well, I'd like to talk about just the nature of creative approval processes.
Okay.
One of the best practices we have, over the years is that anybody who has to approve the creative kind of needs to be involved to some extent throughout the process. Because, if you produce something and then last minute it goes in front of the CEO, or it goes in front of, in this case, maybe a member of the tribal community or some other approver, and they don't have the context, they haven't been involved, that can be a challenge, because now they've got their own ideas, and and they're all great ideas, and it's all good, respectful stuff that we want to include. So if you're already kind of down a creative process and these curveballs get thrown in, it's the reality of creative processes. But the challenge in the learning, I would encourage for anybody, is to try and make sure you've got all the people who can approve and are involved and want to contribute right at the start, and they're involved throughout the process.
All right, Zach, what about you?
Yeah, so going back to coordinating all of these trades and parties, right? That is the initial work that has to be done, and sometimes that can take longer than expected. And especially when you start to introduce having the electricians install conduit and all the required circuits for the display. We have actually a lot of power driving this display. And so all of this electrical power required did introduce some longer than expected lead times on their part. And so that actually dragged things out. But more than that, what was a challenge too was not knowing exactly what was above that hard-lit ceiling. Because we had structural plans, we had architectural plans, but that doesn't give you 100% of the picture, right? And so what was a challenge for the nanolumens engineering team was making sure that the weight of the entire display would be able to be supported by the existing structure. And so they were counting on a certain number of beams being available for them to use. So once the demo happened of that ceiling in late 2022, what ended up happening was there was one less beam than anticipated. And so that caused their team to go back to the drawing board and re-engineer parts of the display. And so that also took longer than expected. But again, it's because of these unknown factors of getting the structural piece figured out and then getting the PE stamps after that to move forward with this. So that was probably the biggest one, is longer than expected lead times and structural unknowns. But again, like Brian was saying, the force perspective as well, and making sure that is coming across the right way. And I was, again, very hands-on with testing that content, taking pictures and video of what I was seeing and relaying it back to Brian and Doug. And so that was a lot of fun, but also a process, right? So
For
it was
sure.
very, very good experience.
On the flip side of that, for each of you, what was your favorite part of this entire project? Brian, do you want to start again?
Seeing it at the end, the grand unveiling. No, I think it's just the satisfaction. I think at the end, and when you see the client and they kind of experiencing it at the end, because they see it in all different phases, and it's also, I think, a bit of a challenge for them to see the final vision when you know what this is going to come out to be, but you can't really kind of show it.
Yeah.
I think at the end of them seeing it, and then just seeing the response too of the guests. When it first, it's funny, like when it first went live, we weren't there and I was sort of scouring their Instagram feed, just trying to find people taking pictures of it. And then you start to see photos of it, and you start to see stories. And that was actually, I think, the cool moment for me, is just to see it on social versus seeing it in person. When you saw it in person, obviously that was amazing. But I think just to see guests, I mean, that was who it was designed for. So to see them reacting to it and posting pictures online on social, that was a real fun moment.
Seeing other people find it awesome. Yeah. Doug, what about you?
Yeah, just the creative process kind of throughout, on our side, producers and animators, on the talking stick side, the marketing team, everybody was super nice and super cool. And everybody that, a really good shared vision of what our goal was here, which was to create something pure and something beautiful and something lasting and something, again, it wasn't just about selling stuff. It actually we wanted to make people feel something, and to have everybody unified on that shared goal was just a really great takeaway from this one.
Nice. And Zach?
I have to agree with Brian on this one. Just seeing people as they walk by, especially as I was testing the content, I was actually going to see how the content was laid out. And so as I was testing this content, I see people walk by me and they're like looking up. Like all of their eyes are just like scanning the entire display. Like, this is cool, right? So just being a part of that process was really exciting. Again, just making sure that content came across the way that was originally envisioned, and all of that was just such a cool process. So that has to be my favorite part. It's always at the very end where you get to see the fruits of your labor, right? It's a lot of work that goes into it prior to commissioning, but then once you're commissioning this and you see it come to life, it's a really amazing thing. So.
Yeah. Well, congratulations to all of you. This install is probably one of my favorites I've seen in the past year. Like I said at the top of this, like we've covered it on Rave. Megan has covered it on Launch Code. So I was excited to get to step in for her and get to ask you guys these questions. So thank you for your time as well. So the last thing I'm going to ask you guys to do is to go around and say where the best place is for people to reach out, contact you if they have any other questions, maybe offline. And then if you had any final remarks. So Brian, go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks, Steph, for having us. It was, it's always awesome to talk to you and the rest of the Rave crew, and we appreciate all the support behind this project too.
Of course.
So, yeah, as far as for OpenEye, I mean, you can find us online, openeyeglobal.com, also on Instagram and X, and then you can find me on LinkedIn, Brian Mazaros. And yeah, feel free to drop us a line.
Awesome. Doug?
You can find me via Brian and OpenEye. And yeah, thanks for having us today, Steph. Great chat.
Perfect. And Zach?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Zach Savo, CTSD. You can also contact us as a company, CCS Presentation System Southwest. We have a website, ccssouthwest.com. But one last thing I wanted to end with is, don't be discouraged if your project is taking just a little longer than you would expect or hope for. I can't tell you like how anxious we were to get this wrapped up, but it was all worth it in the end. It took from May 2022 to about May of 23 to finish this up and see the content live. And so, it may have been a little bit longer than expected, but it was all worth it in the end. It's such a cool display. So.
Yeah, that's good advice. I mean, that's one thing that I have learned about being an AV is that things take a little bit of time. It's a lot of approvals. There's a lot of things that need to happen. So I think in a year, you guys accomplishing this is fantastic. So congratulations again. And thank you all so much for being here.
Cool.
Thanks,
Steph. Thanks.
All right, everybody. So for those of you who are watching, you can find me on Twitter at Steph L. Beckett, and you can find all the latest emerging technology news at Launch Code, which is lavnch.com/LAVNCHCODE. Thank you again to OpenEye Global for sponsoring this session today. And once again, be sure to check them out at openeyeglobal.com.